With us to comment on today's seminars, we have Ambassador Michael Sahlin, co-founder of Consilio International. So Michael, if we start with the seminar, Gotland, Island in the Eye of the Storm, what would you say is your main takeaway from this seminar?
I think the main takeaway is that it is amazing to see the degree of preparedness that representatives of Gotland feel that they are especially required to display. Being in an island in the middle of the hot sea of the Baltic Sea. There was no mention, however, in the beginning that in the case of Gotland, there are two things to be said. One is that Gotland has always been an exposed part, way away from the mainland Sweden, into the contested sea of the Baltic Sea. Nowadays, however, the Baltic Sea is a NATO lake, more or less, as a result of Sweden's and Finland's joining NATO. And hence you could say that with our NATO membership and with the added territories of Finland and Sweden, Gotland would be more safe than in the past, given those things. I'm talking about the paradox here, because on the other hand you could say that in view of the overall geopolitical security tensions in the wider environment, Gotland is more exposed. So it's both less exposed and more exposed. That paradox was not reflected so much in this panel, because they were all testifying to the needs it takes, both militarily and from the civilian society. Even the church representative here was stressing that nowadays things are taken more seriously. The church has been given tasks to see to it that there are graves for the casualties that would be a result of an armed attack, and the civilian society and the regional governor here was talking about all the things that have been different now as a result of this enhanced preparedness needs. So interesting to see the way they were all testifying to the need, and not only the need for protection of Gotland by NATO and by Sweden, mainland Sweden, but also the need to have transportation from the island to mainland Sweden in the cement industry, for example, and other basic facilities. So there is a sort of two-way street of enhanced dependence of functioning systems even under crisis. But my main point is to point to this paradox of both less and more need for preparedness as a result of the different developments that we're talking about.
Thank you. County Governor Charlotte Petri Gornicka also mentioned the possibility of competing interests between various actors, whether it's the military that wants greater influence or the role of the church. How would you say that this concept can be seen in the case of Gotland?
I'm not sure that it can be easily seen, but it is understandable when they explain it in terms of conflicting interest, because there was mention, for example, of two vulnerabilities, water and power. And of course water and power are connected in many ways. I was wondering, by the way, and when you talk about conflicting interests, then you are talking not least about the conflicting interest of these points of need and vulnerability. I was wondering whether there would be a question to the governor. So how are you going to solve the water crisis in Gotland? That question was never asked. It was only mentioned as something that is currently unsolved, and with it the question of power and power generation. In my worldview, I make some comparison here with the island of Cyprus, because there similarly, although it is a very divided island as we know, and but on the Turkish side, the question of possible saving functions from mainland Turkey, water supplies, power supplies, is a critical thing, which I think that you could draw some conclusions from and make some comparison.
Thank you. If we then take a broader view, how would you say that the whole of society approach influences the Swedish decision making towards Gotland?
Well, I think it's both how things need to be solved inside Gotland itself, and then on the national level you have the question of total defense approach to the whole of the country, including Gotland. Bearing in mind, however, that Gotland is a separate island, and you could perhaps also compare with the Bornholm for Denmark, a faraway island belonging to Denmark and having special challenges facing it as it applies to total defense. So it's a mixed bag here, both the local aspect of total defense and the broader Swedish defense.
Thank you. When we look at geopolitically sensitive questions, it's easy to try to compare various geographies and other sorts of actors. Would you say that one could reasonably draw conclusions and comparisons with the current crisis in the Strait of Hormuz and a possible escalation in the Baltic Sea with Gotland as a possible target in such an action?
Yeah, the comparison was made by the regional governor, and I was thinking then, geographically speaking, the comparison would need to be made between Hormuz and perhaps the Danish Straits, an outlet, and you could also talk about the Bosphorus combining the Black Sea and the broader Mediterranean. Gotland is not a choke point in a similar way as those other, but the comparison was meant to imply that now that there is so much international focus on Hormuz, and the focus therefore on flow security, the flows of trade, the flows of energy, flows of all things of importance for the food security, etc. In a way, you could make the comparison that Gotland is situated in the wider Baltic Sea, which is a case in point, but the comparison lacks geographic similarity in those, I think.
Thank you. If we now switch focus to the discussion on the Staybehind movement with Johan Wenström, based on his recent book, what would you say that your main takeaway from this discussion would be?
I think that reading his book and listening to him today and Andreas's questions to him, it's a very interesting case. I was personally involved in this, and I think he mentions me in his book because I was a State Secretary of Defense at the time in 1991 when it was decided to close down this. The skeleton movement was sort of a minor thing which was making this whole Stay Behind movement rather invisible, because it was a colonel that was somehow representing a small secretariat. But he is making comparisons, of course, to the needs of today, and he was somehow praising the spirit of resistance, the spirit of nation, the spirit of being proud of the nation that he feels is lacking in today's world. I would argue a little bit with that, perhaps because there are so many differences comparing today's Sweden with that of the social democratic Sweden, with the main labor organizations and the employers organization. They could dictate things at that time, which would be more difficult perhaps today. But the main question, I think, that leaves behind is the question of whether we need to or have to speculate and prepare even today for occupation. Occupation, of course, is the function of risks of invasion, and invasion takes a lot of ships, frankly, to transport troops across the Baltic Sea. All those things are reasonable, and I think this is a thinking also the current defense commission at the central level. So it is a question of is it useful to signal that we are preparing for occupation as a worst case situation? Are we, if so, are we really thinking of evacuating some person to establish a government of Sweden somewhere else in the UK, for example, as Norway did? I think there are many questions like this that one can raise concerning whether it is applicable to today's situation, given the geopolitics. Of course, there are many risks, we know that, but invasion and occupation is some would say, perhaps far-fetched as a threat image, but you never know. So it is useful, and it gives us the necessary food for thought, at least. But the comparison is critical.
Thank you. What importance would you say that the Stay Behind movement had during the Cold War?
I hesitate to answer this because I'm not sure. I think it had great importance at early stages of the Cold War as a skeleton movement. Then there are many unknowns concerning how big was it, how widespread was it. There was mentioned, for example, here today, that who were they who did this work? They were regular people. Not U.S. agents or something like this, something fancy like this, something sexy like this, some would say, a rather regular thing. But it reflected very much that time's Sweden and its organization. So it's hard for me really to evaluate how important was it. It was never tested, of course. We were never occupied and therefore not tested. So it was a mental experiment of sorts. I think it was useful. I think it was important. How important was it? Hard to say from the point of view of today's world.
Thank you. You mentioned in your answer to the first question that there are many differences with today's reality. Would you say that there is a need for greater societal preparedness and resilience, albeit during a different time and perhaps with different challenges, or would you say that society as a whole is prepared for the current geopolitical landscape that we are in?
I think my answer to that is rather mainstream, as if you quote mainstream Swedes in the security business, who would say that we have been through a period of being marinated by peace, marinated. That's a phrase that is commonly used, and that therefore it takes a lot. And even today, you can see that although there is constant mention of the crisis, never as intense and as dangerous as since the Second World War, stuff like that is being said. But Swedes are leading their regular life, and I don't see much influence in their lifestyles or anything like this. So we are still in the beginning of a process of adaptation to harsher security realities. And I'm stressing it's only the beginning. Lots more has to be done step by step, hoping that security threats will not be cascading into something really dangerous, finally catching us pants down, nonetheless, for all the useful things that have been said. So no, it's not enough. Not enough. At least not for the worst case, which is armed aggression. But we have aggression even now in terms of hybrid warfare. And that too takes a lot of training for resilience that we are only in the beginning of, if you ask me.
Thank you, Mikael. And thank you for the comments on today's seminar. Mikael will, of course, be back throughout the week to summarize the day's seminars, and as always, we look forward to having your insights during this whole Almedalen week.
Thank you. Thank you.